Imagine discovering that most of your brain is missing. Not metaphorically, not as an insult, but physically, gone, compressed, reduced to a thin margin of tissue pressed against the inside of your skull. And yet, you finished school, you built a career, you fell in love, you had children, you worried about bills, you argued about politics, you made plans for the future. You lived what everyone around you considered an ordinary life. In 2007, a 44-year-old man walked into a hospital in Marseille, France. He walked in on his own. He was calm, he was coherent, he was not confused, he was not disoriented. He complained of mild weakness in his left leg. That was it. No seizures, no memory loss, no dramatic symptoms. Doctors ordered a CT scan as a precaution. They expected something small, maybe a minor lesion, maybe nothing at all. But when the images appeared on the screen, the room reportedly fell silent. His skull was largely filled with fluid. The ventricles inside his brain were massively enlarged. The brain tissue itself had been pushed outward, flattened, compressed into a thin layer lining the inside of the skull. He had severe hydrocephalus, and yet he had lived 44 years without realizing the extent of it. Hydrocephalus is a condition in which cerebrospinal fluid accumulates inside the brain. Normally, this fluid cushions neural tissue. It protects the brain from mechanical injury. It delivers nutrients. It removes waste. But when it builds up excessively, pressure increases. Brain structures become compressed. In infants, the skull can expand. In adults, it cannot. The skull is rigid, so pressure moves inward. Untreated acute hydrocephalus can cause severe cognitive damage. It can lead to coma. It can be fatal. But this case was not acute. It developed slowly, very slowly. Medical records suggested that he had a shunt placed during childhood. At some point, it stopped functioning. Fluid began accumulating again. But it did so over decades, not days, not weeks, decades. And that timeline may explain everything. When the brain is damaged suddenly, the consequences are often catastrophic. A stroke can erase speech in minutes. A traumatic injury can destroy memory instantly. The brain has no time to reorganize. The system collapses. But when structural change unfolds gradually, something remarkable can happen. The brain adapts. This capacity is called neuroplasticity. For much of the 20th century, scientists believed the adult brain was fixed. They believed neural connections were permanent. They believed damage was irreversible. But modern research has revealed something radically different. The brain is dynamic. It constantly rewires itself. Neurons strengthen connections with use. Unused pathways weaken. Entire functional regions can shift. In stroke patients, neighboring areas sometimes take over lost functions. In children who undergo hemispherectomy, the removal of an entire half of the brain, the remaining hemisphere can reorganize. Speech can survive. Movement can survive. Personality can survive. If half a brain can sustain consciousness, what about a brain compressed to a thin shell? The French patient's case suggests that if structural change occurs slowly enough, the brain may continuously reorganize itself. Instead of losing function abruptly, it redistributes it. Instead of shutting down, it compensates. Over years, over decades, gradually reshaping internal networks to adapt to spatial constraints. This does not mean brain tissue is unnecessary. It does not prove that humans only use 10% of their brains. That myth is false. Brain imaging clearly shows widespread activation across regions during even simple tasks. There is no massive unused reserve waiting to be unlocked. What this case suggests is more subtle. Perhaps intelligence is not purely about size. Perhaps it is about organization, connectivity, efficiency, network dynamics. The man's IQ was measured at approximately 75, slightly below average. But he maintained employment. He formed relationships. He raised children. He functioned independently. He was not profoundly impaired. He was not dependent. He was living. His consciousness persisted. His personality remained intact. This raises a profound question. How much neural substrate is truly required to sustain identity? Is consciousness proportional to mass, or is it an emergent property of organized information flow? Some neuroscientists propose that consciousness arises from patterns of integration across neural networks. If so, what matters most may not be quantity, it may be structure, it may be efficiency. A compressed but well-organized network may still produce coherent awareness. There are other cases that hint at similar principles. Children born with severe cortical malformations sometimes exceed developmental expectations. Stroke patients sometimes recover speech once thought permanently lost. Patients with traumatic injuries can regain function through rehabilitation and neural adaptation. The brain constantly reshapes itself in response to constraint. But this case pushes adaptation to an extreme. How thin can the margin be before the system collapses? Where is the boundary between sufficient and insufficient? We still do not know. Eventually, doctors treated the hydrocephalus by inserting a new shunt. Excess fluid was drained. Pressure decreased. His leg weakness improved, but the compressed anatomy remained. The brain did not suddenly expand to normal volume, and yet he continued living. For centuries, humans have associated intelligence with size. Larger brains were assumed to indicate greater cognitive capacity, but modern neuroscience suggests something different. The brain weighs roughly 1.5 kilograms. Within that tissue exist billions of neurons and trillions of synaptic connections. What generates thought is not weight, it is pattern. Electrical signals traveling across interconnected networks. Perhaps the defining feature of intelligence is not how much brain we have, but how effectively it is organized. There is something deeply humbling about this case. The organ we rely on to understand reality may still conceal principles we barely grasp. If someone can live for decades with most of their cranial cavity filled with fluid, what other assumptions about the mind are incomplete? How fragile is our definition of normality? How narrow is our understanding of adequacy? Perhaps the boundaries of possibility are wider than we imagine. A man walked into a hospital with mild leg weakness. He walked out having quietly challenged neuroscience. He did not feel extraordinary. He did not perceive himself as abnormal. He simply lived. Sometimes adaptation happens so gradually that no one notices. Sometimes resilience hides in silence, and sometimes reality is far stranger than fiction. That is not speculation. That is not exaggeration. That is oddly true.